All right, so this video is to go over, there are 3 assignments to complete during the reading of your book. But I would encourage you to take a look at all 3 before you begin to read, and then make sure that you are completing all of them as you go. I was reading this book at night at home, and I had my notebook at school. So I waited to complete parts of it, and it was pretty challenging. Whereas if there were a couple of them with figurative language, so I was like, oh, I got to remember that there was a simile right here. And then of course I didn't write the page number down and I couldn't go back and find it easily. So you want to make sure that you keep track as you're going. It'll be that much easier. The first one that you see here is the plot diagram. And this is similar to what we did earlier in the year, where we talked about the plot diagram of A Wrinkle in Time. The difference is the way that it's cut out. So I'll show you, it does tell you to cut along the dotted lines and flip up the tab. So what I had done is I cut out the whole piece, and I have my triangle in the middle, but I didn't completely cut these off of them. But the only part glued down is the triangle, and then I put a glue along this black line as well. And then these tabs, you can see I can flip the tabs on those solid lines, and I have things written underneath each of those steps. Now I want to remind you that where you're going to be writing the most of your information is in this rising action. So exposition's the beginning of the story, where it introduces the plot, the characters, the setting, conflict. And then the rising action are all those little conflicts that are leading up to your climax. And the climax is towards the end of the novel, that turning point and the most exciting part. And then the falling action, there's minimal usually, and then the resolution, how is it resolved? So although this is to be completed during, much of this will be done when you're at the end of the book. So these last 2 probably will be based on the last chapter or 2. So that's that one. The next page deals with internal and external conflict. And in your notebook, we have some directions here. It does ask you to also explain those conflicts a little bit. So I know once you cut it out, sometimes you might just be quickly recognizing them. You get points for that too. Even if you can't figure out how to explain them, turn in what you can that goes along with it. Keep this bottom part attached so that you can write that in there. So this one's a little bit easier because you end up creating an outside tab. So I'll show you how it looks in my notebook. I cut this bottom part, and then I have the square up here. The glue went along these edges. It went on this bottom part and on the side, and then I did cut these out here. I will tell you, I cut before I glued, which did make the cutting easier. Okay, so some of them, like if on this paper, to cut it, I did fold it in half on that dotted line, and then it made cutting this part a little bit easier. And then I kind of did the same thing. I folded it this way and then cut on those lines. And then I did do the glue around the edges. And I did have to be real careful because then these sides were kind of floppy and it was a little tricky to get it to glue down. So do the best that you can with it, getting that glued down. So we did this at the beginning of the year as well. We had pages on internal and external conflict, once again, with A Wrinkle in Time. So think about internal conflict that's inside of a character, a struggle that somebody's trying to make, something inside their mind. And then external, there are 3 listed here. I'd like you to try to come up with all 3. Person to person, person versus environment, person versus society. And we had the same thing, except it was man versus man, man versus environment or nature, man versus society. Those mean the exact same thing, just coming from different people, worded a little bit differently. Then when you're done with the book, you need to go back again. Is the conflict resolved at the end of the novel? Why or why not? Make sure that you explain that. I had a yes and a no answer. I'm just going to show you that I did fill in all those lines. I started out by saying the yes or no. I gave my yes answer and I gave my no answer. So you want to make sure that you take a look at those. The last one for inside or while you're reading the book, and this is the one I hinted to, that this you really want to keep handy as you're doing it. This is figurative language, and we've gone over almost all of these. Go back to your notebooks. We've covered metaphor, simile, personification, onomatopoeia, hyperbole. We've covered alliteration, oxymoron. We have not covered puns. A pun is a play on words. Imagery, we've talked about, but I don't think it's in your notebook. Symbolism is usually a focus we have in 7th grade when an object represents something else, but we did a different novel this year, so it's not there. We did talk about illusion, and I believe you have notes on it. We haven't talked about flashback or flash forward, but it's basically what it's saying. If within the novel, there's a flashback to a previous time, or if you're flash forwarding to something, and that could be an example. Foreshadowing hints towards something that's going to happen later. Those are easy to recognize after the fact. And irony, when the opposite of what you expect happens. So those last couple we haven't done as much with, but we covered quite a few of those. You only have to recognize 4. I don't know why. I think there's an error where it says 1, 1, 1, 1. They should be different numbers. I'd like you to have different examples, but if your book is more dominant in, like my book had tons of similes throughout. I never did find that one that I was remembering, but I found another one later on. So if you have 2, that's fine, but try to come up with a variety of different ones. So the way that I chose to cut this one out, excuse me, I cut on these arrows so that I had these words still glued into my notebook so that I knew what they were. And then I cut this part. And the same thing, when you go to cut on those dotted lines so that they'll open up, if you fold on the dotted line and then cut across this way, and then fold on the other dotted line and cut across, so that when you put it into your notebook, you have a triangle flap that's going to flip up. This was another one that was kind of wiggly once I had that cut, and then I put the glue. The glue is going to go on the back of the solid lines here and then across the top. Okay. You can use a glue stick, and remember, if you do use Elmer's glue, which is what I did do this time, and it's really gluey. Make sure you use those baby dots that we talked about. You don't want to have a big mess of glue on your notebook. So I'm not going to give you all my examples, but I'll tell you I found a simile, I found onomatopoeia, I found irony, and I also found alliteration. This notebook is in my classroom, so if you want to ask to see it, I'll try to put it on the cart too, so if we have some downtime, you can take a look at what I did to help give you some ideas. Just, you got to do it on your own.